Good morning. This is Jim Whining, an ordinary man, and today's conversation is all about the responsibility we have with social media. Today's world is so connected. We are like within seconds of being in connection all the time with millions upon millions of people. And that is a great responsibility we have. And we need to be prudent about how we use that responsibility. This little item called a phone is in almost everybody's hand. And in that item is the communication means and the support or the disagreement or the dissemination of material which may or may not be true. And so we now today have a greater fiduciary responsibility than we have ever had before in affecting our life. And we certainly don't want wrong and miscommunication to ever result in a world and nuclear holocaust like it occurred with Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of World War II. Let me start this by saying the best way to explain a complicated situation is to take an ordinary situation that you may have experienced as a parent, which I have. And then I will chop that up into pieces for us to consider as we reflect on material that comes to us. And I realized how important that was when the other day I was listening to a news media report that was recounting the existence and or the destruction of a U.S. naval ship, which obviously was not, and also the amount of damages that they were inflicting on the United States and Iran that was not. And that news media was reporting Iran's information as the truth. And that should be a flag that says, hey, I need to change the dial. And so I want for a second to change the dial for you and just put yourself in this situation. And then after you go through this, maybe you'll have some other thoughts about some of the things that I'm going to talk about, like truth, accountability, and obedience. A few years back, we went to a trip in St. Louis to Budweiser and also the zoo at the same time. And I'm not certain how it transpired because neither Pam nor I are drinkers of anything that involves alcohol. Not that we're saying you can't drink alcohol responsibly, but I will say that there was a stand there at the zoo and then was giving away free shots to adults on its product called, well, it was Lemon Rock beer. I don't want to advertise it, but it was called Lemon Rock beer. And Pam really liked the flavor of it. And I don't know, maybe it was the heat or whatever. And I thought, well, I might just buy her a little bottle, a 6 bottle case for her to have, at home. And so I did. And when we got home, we have a den and an office on the connected directly to our bedroom, and it does not go out to the rest of the house. And I put that in there, obviously, because we had 3 boys in the house, and sometimes 3 boys and 2 girls. So it was something that I didn't want anybody to have easy access to. So about 3 or 4 days passed, and I was going in there getting my A&W Diet Root beer out, and I noticed that 2 or 3 bottles, no, 2 bottles were missing the first time. And I thought, wow, I don't remember seeing Pam drink those Lemon Rock beers. And then I thought, well, maybe she just had a hard day at school or something. Maybe she had a beer or something. No big deal. And then maybe by the end of the week, I popped in there for my usual, diet A&W root beer, and I noticed that there was only like maybe 2 bottles in there, and I thought, wow, man, that's really something. So then I guess it was a Sunday or something like that. It was in the afternoon, and I went in there to get a Lemon Rock beer. I was going to go in the living room and watch the Chiefs football game. Opened up the refrigerator, and I looked down at that little case, that little cardboard case that had the Lemon Rock beers in it, and there was none in it. There were 6 gone in 7 days. I thought, whoa, Wow. So as I was going back to the living room to sit down and watch the ball game, I said, "Man, Pam, you really been enjoying those lemon rock beers." And she said, "Well, I thought you were drinking them." And I said, "You mean you haven't had any lemon rock beers?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, I certainly haven't had any lemon rock beers." And then the flag went up. And Pam said, "All right." And she made a yell for the boys to come in. And they all lined up in the living room. And Pam said, your father bought me this a 6-pack of lemon rock beer. And every one of them is gone in a week. And I haven't had a one of them. And nor has your dad. What about you? Has anyone here had a lemon rock beer?" And she turned to all three of the boys. I won't mention their names. You guys know who they are. And to the T, every one of them said, "No, swear to God, no, no, I don't even know where your refrigerator is. No, no." Well, then Pam said, "Well, huh." And for some reason, she went out the back door and stuck her hand underneath the patio deck and found one of the beer bottles. And she took took a pencil out of her pocket and put the beer bottle into the pencil. Walked back into the living room, looked at the boys and said, "Look, I found one of my lemon rock beers bottles underneath the deck outside. Now, which one of you has been drinking these lemon rock beers?" "No, none of us, none of us." And then she said, I just got to thinking when I was doing this investigation, you know, I know somebody who's in the police department in Independence who is a forensic person who could probably find the fingerprints on Bible, on this bottle, and we will know exactly which one of you boys have done it because we have your fingerprints. So I think I'll check that out. Now, if I find that out and you don't confess, then there's a chicken coop that needs to be completely cleaned out. And you know what I mean by cleaning out a chicken coop. And all of a sudden, one of the boys had seen truth and stepped forward and said, "Yeah, yeah, I drank all those beers." Okay. Through that process, I hope you heard some things that we need to think about today on social media. We need to really look carefully at the evidence that's given on a post or in a social media blast. We need to, when we get that information, the first thing we should think is there anything that collaborates that information? Is there somebody else, some other source, is that evidence that I should keep on my phone or my social media platforms, or is that something I should remove? Or maybe that is something that you could correct because it's slightly incorrect. We need to really check against other information. There may not be. And so you've got to go into it deeper. And you've got to check on if there's any statements from people that you would consider credible. And you need to be able to define in your mind if that particular person is credible or not. And if that person is one of the sources that you consider credible, then this is something you bounce off of. This is something you reflect on. This is something you really have an understanding of. For example, that Iran is saying there is absolutely no peace negotiations going on. And Pakistan and India and Switzerland says there is. Now, which source are you going to take? Use some common sense here. But I say this because not only do you need to have collateral information, you also need to have confirmation from other viable sources. These are things that are so important in grasping what you on your social platforms allow to be disseminated along with your reputation goes with that information flow. And the information flow in social media is so fast that within hours you can have someone dead and buried who is giving the speech that night for the United States government. That's how bad it can get. And how do we correct that? How do we correct that? Well, we've got to use some common sense, some ordinary common sense. We need to do the steps that I mentioned before, and then we should say to ourselves, is this truth? Is this prejudicial? Is this really valid information? Is this truth? And then we need to say, is that source a source that is accountable? Have they consistently provided truth? Have they consistently given information that's benefited not only you, but society? Are they trustworthy? Is that a trustworthy source? Is a source that refers to Iran statements as true and not the United States government, is that a trustworthy source? Is it? And then when that is said and done, we also need to do that last piece, which is the real basis of a free society. And that is that we are obedient, and we are obedient to the law and order of our country. If there is material that's being promoted that is injurious to people, detrimental to society, destructive to property, infringing upon persons' personal and social rights, are we being obedient to the law by promoting that on our social platforms? You have to live with that decision. Or is that something you take down as a post on your platforms? Is that something you do not disseminate into society because you want to be identified as a person who is delivering truth, accountability, and obedience to law and order? This is the fiber of the United States government. This is the foundation Christ gave to our country when the founding fathers created the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So really, when we look at the responsibility of posting truth, of posting accountable information from accountable people, and obeying the law of the country, these are the things that Jesus preached on when he said, we must respect one another, we must trust one another, and we, through this, will love one another. This has been Jim Whining, an ordinary man, saying, when you have this phone in your hand, you have the power that can make or break the freedoms of this country and the basis upon which God has vested us to be here at this time. Thank you. I hope you have a great day. This is an ordinary man saying, God loves you, and so do I.